Order. Question number 6, Julie Ann Genter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. How many default KiwiSaver fund providers currently invest in companies that manufacture cluster bombs?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, ministers are not directly responsible for the investment decisions of these independent fund providers, but I have seen media reports about 5 default KiwiSaver fund providers may have investments in the areas described by the member. I'm unable to verify that figure because ministers are not directly responsible for those investment decisions.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
Why aren't ministers directly responsible, given that it's government-directed savings of 500,000 New Zealanders that may be going into companies that produce illegal weapons of war?
The Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, because New Zealanders with KiwiSaver's accounts have a choice about which scheme to join and can find out what that scheme invests in.
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
Does he accept that it is far simpler and easier for his government to verify if funds are legally and ethically compliant, rather than leaving it to 500,000 New Zealanders who may not have that information available, and it's not that easy to get from the KiwiSaver fund providers?
The Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, insofar as there are specific legal requirements, our expectation is that KiwiSaver providers will obey the law. But insofar as there are moral judgments required, then we believe individual investors are best placed to make those judgments. And the KiwiSaver periodic disclosure regulations require providers to disclose the investment they've made, and the system has worked effectively in this case so that those investments have been outlined in public, and providers will have to make a decision about how they respond.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
So is he saying that his government thinks it's up for debate whether or not it's ethical for companies to produce weapons like landmines that kill 15,000 to 20,000 people every year, most of them children, women, and the elderly, and severely maim many more?
The Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that insofar as there are specific legal requirements, we expect KiwiSaver providers to obey the law. But where there are moral judgments to be made, we believe that individual investors are best placed to make those moral judgments.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
What advice has he received or requested on the legality of New Zealand companies investing directly or indirectly in companies that produce cluster bombs?
The Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if there is a legal requirement, then it's up for the appropriate enforcement agencies to enforce the law.
Order?
I'll allow the member to repeat the question. It may not have been understood.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What advice has he received or requested on the legality of New Zealand companies investing directly or indirectly in companies that produce cluster bombs?
The Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've asked for advice on that, and there is some indication that the law in relating to Cluster Munitions Prohibition Act may apply, but that's up for the appropriate enforcement authority to decide whether or not there has been a breach of the law.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
When did he receive that advice, and who is the relevant enforcement authority?
Either of those two supplementary questions, the Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
This morning.
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
Will he, at the very least, commit to bringing default KiwiSaver providers' investments in line with the Superfund's exclusion list and ensuring that they're legally and ethically invested?
The Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, Insofar as there are moral judgments required, it's our belief you can have there are two choices. You can have the government deciding those moral questions by banning particular things, or you can trust the New Zealand investors to make those moral judgments based on quality advice. And so the scheme that we have in place insists and expects that KiwiSaver providers disclose the investments that they make. Those are publicly available. They can be searched and analysed, as they have been, and made public. And so the KiwiSaver providers will need to make a judgment about how comfortable they are with their offerings, and individual KiwiSaver investors can make a decision.
Supplementary question. Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Speaker. As the Minister responsible for appointing default KiwiSaver providers under Section 132 of the KiwiSaver Act, why has he not taken more action to assess whether the Cluster Munitions Prohibition Act 2009 makes it a criminal offence to invest in cluster munitions with a maximum penalty of 7 years imprisonment or a fine of up to $500,000?
The Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Because, Mr. Speaker, because if there has been any breach of the law, it's up to the appropriate enforcement authorities to investigate.
Question number 7.